Deb, can you hold on for a second?
Just get started.
I don't usually, jury things. I mean, I feel like I look at lots of images. I teach. I've taught photography for decades, and so in some sense, I'm always, sort of looking at images and trying to figure out, trying to meet the image where it is, and also trying to meet the photographer where he or she is. And I often think of myself more as a facilitator than a judge or juror. And so it's an interesting process to be in this deciding, who gets on the ark and who doesn't. And then once you get to 70, or I think there's 64 images in the show, then I was really very satisfied and I guess a little relieved when what I'd seen on a screen that looked good also looked good on a piece of paper. I'm a real believer in the and not a judge about it, but a real believer in the translation of the image to a physical thing. And when I came into the show, which was so well installed, and Richard did such a great job to see work that looks well as a physical object was really satisfying. We all know that the last thing the world needs anymore right now is any more pictures. And I tell my students there was a time when I could sit in a intro photo class and have maybe 1 out of 15 students have ever taken a picture, and that's not the case anymore. And none of us are ever at any event where we're the only photographer. There's actually, everybody's a photographer. There's probably nobody that hadn't taken a picture at this point. So it's a very different time to sort of think about photography and think about where we collectively fit into it. In some ways, to sit here and talk about images is, we all ought to be out making images. And yet, we have to be deliberate about making images, and so that's what I'd like to sort of think about. I'm showing these in the categories in which they exist in the show. That is, there's a black and white category, there's a color category, there's a manipulation category, and an alternative category. A little bit about the award task. Something else that I'm not. I said to somebody, I'm not going to try to revise the photo jury world in my lifetime, but if I was, I would take away this idea that once you're in a show, then there's another tier of who gets the blue ribbon and who gets the red ribbon, and so on and so forth. I think we're photographers and artists in general are a small bunch of pilgrims that will be lucky to get through the valley of the shadow, and to then start dividing up and competing over who gets 250 and 500. I did feel a little bit like, you have a litter of really wonderful puppies, and then you've been asked to figure out who's going to eat and who's not. So that was not a simple task, and because in one sense, so much of this work is so deserving of so many things. But I think I started photographing as a way to both be within the world that I was photographing and to be on the edge of it, looking in, to be in that liminal space. My interest, like this Jimmy Nicholson picture, has always been a cultural and historical interest. And later, I learned how to, hopefully, when it works, to bring an aesthetic DNA of some kind to it, and to create a body of work What is a body of work? There's a body right there. That was a nice little moment. What's a body of work? And I think that so many of us probably are. I'm so much more interested in a body of work than in individual pictures. Obviously, individual pictures in a show like this, that may be all you have in the show is one picture. But how do we make work so that it is sustainable for us as makers, but also as it adds up to something? And I think, the long view is what's so often missing in anything, not just in photography. Sort of deciding I'm going to, keep returning to the same well. I'm going to keep some of the same aspirations. I'm going to keep looking at some of the same things. Maybe I'm going to look at it beyond being as interested as I was the first time to see if I can make something coherent and something that hasn't already been made. And then you have an image like this, which is all about just a beautiful kind of moment that probably, we don't know. I mean, I'll say, for all that photographs tell us, they tell us so little, because there's this whole world outside this frame that we really don't know anything about unless the photographer tells us. And sometimes when that happens, the photograph is not as interesting anymore. But there's a great mystery to this. There's also a lot of fact and evidence in this. And it's when those two things, for me, come together, it's most interesting to me. When evidence and bearing witness and culture and politics and place come together with a sense of aesthetic mystery, with this thing we might call beauty, which is so undefinable, or when like in a picture like this, when there's such a complexity in the most simple, ridiculously simple thing. 4 people. What picture did you like today? Well, I saw this one of 4 people leaning up against some poles. Oh, well, that really sounds interesting. Well, of course that's not what it is. That is what it is, but that's not what makes a picture last or make us think way beyond what the photograph is really able to do on its own, on this flat black and white, or this. Richard asked me why I liked this photograph over his others. That's a really hard question. Always, students ask me that all the time. Well, why that one over this one? And I know for sure that this one's a better one than that one, but then I have to actually explain it. That's both what we have to do with our own work, but it's also what we have to do if we teach or be in moments like this. But this picture here, it's all about just a sliver of time when one person, one little girl, looks in one direction. It's about 3 numbers. It's about this pyramid. I don't know. I wouldn't. We can jerk all the blood out of an image by talking about it too much, and yet, we need to think of those sorts of things. I'm really drawn to the idea that a photograph well made, any photograph well made of anything, is a kind of offering. Can have a kind of, and I use sacred in the most ecumenical way, but it can raise the most ordinary moment or place or landscape or quality of light into something that it both is and is beyond what it was or is. I think black and white photography does that extremely well because of the way that it traffics in metaphor quicker or more naturally than the more literal color, and yet color can do it just as well. It's all a translation, and it's a translation through what did Paul Kowalski say, the photographer from Jimmy Nicholson's hometown. Jimmy's usually introduced as from Paul's hometown, so I'll change that around. But you know, Paul Kowalski said, "I'm only one set of eyes and one mind," and sort of, I'm not finishing the quote, and so that's it. That's all I have to bring to this medium, and that's all any of us really have. Kowalski said he also said what did he say? He rearranges the sacred furniture of what is with every photograph. We put these little boxes around it: rectangle, square, panoramic, whatever. And so that translation is so important. And so when I look at a body of work, I'm both looking at, you know, what is. It's a toad and a teacup. But you know, what is this translation going on, and where's the metaphor? Where's the narrative? You know, I think Francis Bacon said, if there's a human form anywhere, there's a story. You know, so you see this hand reaching in. There can be a story without a human form. I don't mean, but you get a hand with two teacups and a toad. If I gave everybody in this room this picture and we had to go off for 15 minutes and write something, we would all write something extremely different. Same with this picture, where you get this nice. I really am drawn to photographs where the subject is acknowledging the camera or the act of making a picture. And I think we see that increasingly in this, well, it's been many years where we've been much more attuned to the photograph not being just some observed moment, but some engaged moment. And so how does that engagement happen? How does, when I, you know, judge work or look at bodies of work, and I'm going to use this Tom's picture I really am much more panoramic in my view than I am when I'm making my own photographs. You know, if I just looked at other people's photographs through the lens of my own work, for one, it wouldn't be very interesting for me, but it also I wouldn't be bringing anything to anybody. I mean, I'll make the work I make, but when I'm tasked to look at student work or work like in this show, I have a very panoramic view that is much, much bigger than my own photographic practice and aesthetic, and that's the joy of you know, I mean, whatever work is involved in teaching or doing this kind of thing, the joy of it is to have that big view and to try to look and see what is it people are up to and how do I get with them. It's kind of like traveling to another country and going and expecting them to have the food you make at home. Well, that would be why even go there? You go, and one of the great gifts of the medium, I think for many of us, has been or is that it gets us beyond ourselves, which is a conundrum in this age when students and maybe us are trying to figure out how to honestly put ourselves in our work, and we got into the medium. I sometimes honestly say I think I first got a camera, it gave me an excuse to go places I wasn't supposed to go. I've told this before, hopefully you've not heard it, but probably. But when I was young, you know, my dad said, sort of basically forbid us, said, you know, you shouldn't go to these pool halls around town. I grew up in Kentucky, outside of Louisville, Kentucky. You shouldn't go to these pool halls in town. You know, he said, I'm not saying that everybody in the pool hall is a son of a bitch, but I will say that if a son of a bitch comes to town, the pool hall is probably the first place he goes. And all that did was want to make me go to the pool hall. And that and the camera have sort of been, you know, and there's no better excuse to go anywhere than to say, well, I'm just curious. There are also issues, you know, it can be problematic. And, you know, why are you there? And it is that drew me first into kind of simultaneously into photography and folklore and ethnography and film, is that idea that, you know, what is it to begin to look at the juxtaposition in another place, like in this image of a kind of sacred and profane, or a kind of, you know, gone and present, or memorialized and commercialized, or whatever else is going on in this image and in these spaces. It's that kind of thing that I'm most interested in imagery, both interested in making, but also in seeing in other people's work. And I think those are, we all come to this medium differently, but there is a way in which there's certain abiding themes through the medium. And then it is, somebody said today, I've now forgotten who, how do you make an image, that you haven't seen 5,000 of them already of the same thing? How do you photograph a tornado? I think this is from Rolling Fork, Mississippi, post tornado. Well, there's, every disaster has a camera. It's treacherous to try to make a new image of that. How do we do it? And maybe the answer, we're learning more and more of the answer is the long engagement, not the drive-by shot. And yet, we shouldn't be so quick to come up with, to get past some earlier problematic rules. We probably shouldn't be so quick to come up with new ones that are overly simplistic, because there are times when, the quick, impulsive response to a moment is exactly what is needed. There are other times when engagement and conversation and reciprocity are what a photograph is really all about. A photographic moment, a photographic body of work, the goals of the work itself. This kind of, I used to, when I don't teach Photo 1 anymore, I teach a view camera class now that is sort of Photo 1, which is, if you'd have told me that, even 5 years ago, I probably would have said that's going to be difficult. But now, most of my undergraduate students have not been in a darkroom until they take their first darkroom class. And that may well, I can't say we're going to have a prerequisite of the 4x5 class be intro to photography, because there are not enough spots in the intro to photography. So people come into a 4x5 class having never been in a darkroom, and within 3 weeks they have to make prints after learning to process their own film, and they have to make portraits where there's a real reciprocity. And I think that in some ways is a great place to start. I never would have thought it. This image, has that kind of both. I mean, who knows what was actually going on here? But in the image, for me, it's both the acknowledgement of the photographer and maybe the acknowledgement that I'm not sure I want to be a part of the photographer at the moment. Or maybe it's just a moment that happened. We don't really know. And that, there again, is this tension between the photograph as bearing witness to something that happened, where we know what happened, and the mystery, the mythology, the poetry that is impossible to nail down. I think one of the great things about the history of photography, but also about the photographic moment, is the inability to nail everything down, even though it is always, I think, sort of a human desire. We'd like to get clarity, but sometimes we can't even see the trees. It's a pretty good moment sometimes we can't get enough clarity to even see where we are. The fog's too thick. And we get these kind of tableaus. This is one of those. I mean, there's nothing that interests me more about photography now that I've been doing than light. For all the other things I get excited about, in terms of content, it's light that keeps me really excited. It's the only thing photography is really about, always. And qualities of light and the diffusion of light and the inability to both see and the seen and the unseen. I'm as interested in the unseen as I am the seen. and that's a that's a odd place for a photograph to rest in some ways, right? The photograph's about seeing, but I really do think it's the unseen. It's what's not in the photograph, or what's not visible from the photograph. The way the photograph has excised part of life and left out all kinds of others. The photograph is a very impotent piece of language, because there's this infinite amount of information outside this frame that we never get. Now, I say never, but sometimes we do. Sometimes, you think of a photographer like Wright Morris from the 40s and 50s, his books, where he was also a novelist, and it published photographs and huge amounts of text. And some of us, in this show that we saw last night, it's not a text-based show, but I think we do see more and more of us trying to figure out, where does text belong in this? What is the intersection of words and images that I want? How much do we need to know about the Rosenwald School to know what these pictures of Rosenwald School really mean? Well, a lot. It's not, this statement that I sometimes hear from students, I just want my photographs to speak for themselves. Well, it doesn't always work. And what does that mean? The cacophony, this is a great picture the cacophony that we're trying to organize, which I think is what we're doing all the time. We're trying to take this, whether we use a rectangle or a frame, or if we're Tom Bennett, we use 7 by 17 or whatever the hell, long and narrow. But we're trying to organize a certain cacophony in this, this space. And I think that's both really important to understand that that's what we're doing, and it's also important to acknowledge that we just are showing you a sliver of the moment, and that's our magic if when it works. And sometimes we're taking the most mundane things, just a fallen tree, and and water. I mean, they're just elements. Or the thing itself is all it needs. The last thing it needs is me to do much with the thing itself. Photographs that acknowledge the photograph. It's not new. It's been. You can go into the history of pictures of pictures being made has been something. We just made one a minute ago. It's something we do, but it's something that's been done a long time. But I think that this image works because of what's going on the right side of the frame. I mean, there's other things going on in the image, but there's something about this sort of layers of observation that we're seeing and feeling. The imagery, back to these categories, what's manipulation, what's alternative. I guess we could sort of agree on what's color and what's black and white. But manipulation and alternative are different things. Or what's a decisive moment in itself, and what's a piece of sort of directed imagery. With this, I love, one reason I'm really drawn to this image is the light, is the way, the illumination of both the subjects. One happens to be the photographer, but we don't know that immediately unless we have been told or get. But it's the illumination, and it's the intersection, and it's the narrative. Similarly here, we know something. There's something being done for the photograph. We're not really thinking the photographer just sort of stumbled into this house and this was happening, right? And that kind of we see more and more of that imagery, but it's not new to the medium. I mean, we can look back at the 19th century and see similar kinds of and then there's an image like this that has at least the illusion that it's a complete observation of a moment, but maybe not. I mean, how do we know? Does it matter? It really doesn't. I mean, it does in the sense of trying to unpack somebody's engagement with the community, but in terms of the way the photograph is built, and the both distance and proximity. I think this was submitted into. Is this in no? This was alternative. I've become so old that Polaroid is alternative. but again, I'm not making fun of those categories, but I am. It's a Rorschach. You know, what's alternative, what's manipulated. I would say every photograph's manipulated in some way if it's going to work, right? Or take it in the dark room and you burn and dodge, or something's happening. This kind of the conversation of two frames, the diptych, the I don't know how many of you all, but as a photographer, I increasingly find myself frustrated with the single frame as much as I love the single frame. It's why the book is a really wonderful medium, because it takes the single frame and puts it in sequence. The exhibition does that, but you can't control the sequence so much in an exhibition because you can't really control how people walk or move. But in an image like this, which is an image of two images, there's a kind of language going back and forth, looking in opposite directions, but from the same space. And it's that kind of, I think we see more and more of that, of this, you know, how do we get beyond the single frame, the single image, and yet there's nothing more wonderful than the single image, you know, done well. When I was looking through this, when I was jurying this, so you know, you jury these anonymously, or I'm not anonymously, but the work is anonymous. I don't know whose is whose, and occasionally you recognize somebody's work if you've been around too long. And sometimes you recognize something. I photographed this same thing like 5 years ago in black and white. And I think this is actually probably a more interesting picture. I didn't go back and look at, but who wouldn't stop here, right? Would anybody in this room not like think, well, maybe I should just see what that is? It's in somebody's yard, and I think in Sylacauga. And then back to the wonder of abstraction, which I think is, if there's anything that keeps us all engaged with this medium, it's the elements like this that can just be both everything and nothing. Another narrative, whether constructed or not, just layers of narrative that are happening, and that the photograph has this great. This was submitted as in manipulation. I have no idea what was manipulated here. I don't know. You know, was there not a truck? Was there? Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I don't know. But it's. I think again the kind of quality of light, the luminance of basically nothingness is fascinating there. These we're now in the manipulation category. I think we're in the manipulation category. And this one I find really intriguing because of the ways that it is both material. It's sewn into. It's I can't explain it, you know, and I like that. I like the way that it feels, both like a page out of a scrapbook or an early 19th century memory book or a quilt and a photograph. I think it's called something like, what's the title of this, Richard? Glowing. Glowing, right. I was going to say luminous, but glowing. I don't know if it's too light in here to see that. Here's one of those of the seen and unseen that I so like. The fact that most of the photograph is not quite visible. The alternative process work again was a relief to in a way to see it on the wall. The pieces so well put together, the craft. And I guess if there's anything while we're talking about what I really look for, which you can't look for when you're asked to jury one of these on a computer, but I think, and now it's going to sound like somebody maybe like nostalgia, but I think that in this Instagram moment, or in the moment where we can all take pictures, and I think it's great that we can all take pictures. I think the craft of the thing itself, of the object, is something to really pay attention to. I think we all ought to, and none of us do enough of it, but we all ought to make more prints. We're all drowning in our negatives if we're analog photographers, and we're drowning in even more files if we're digital photographers. I mean, we got way more pictures than we ever need, but we probably don't have way more prints than we ever need. And so I think that perhaps one of the reasons that we see and are participating in perhaps this turn to more interest in analog is to slow down the process a bit, is to slow it down. That doesn't mean do less. I don't think those are the same thing, but slow down the process, finish more work, and send that work out into the world so it can then be in these conversations, whether those conversations are about a historical moment that still resonates, like because I was just talking about the Rosenwald School, or whether it's about a particular place, or a particular road, or a family, or an individual's photographer's notions of identity. Whatever it is, until it's pushed out into the world in some way other than a social media moment, it has a difficult time, engaging in this conversation that can lead to a kind of reciprocity. And I think that's the same kind of reciprocity that can happen when you take a portrait of somebody, when you set up a view camera, or even stand with a handheld camera and ask somebody if you can take their picture. That engagement, many times I've thought that I really don't, and this isn't true probably, but I really don't care about the photograph. That was the coolest little encounter under this bridge that I'll have this week. And if I hadn't gone down there to take a picture, so who cares about the picture? Well, I do still care about the picture, but it's really that engagement that, and that engagement can also be with one's grandmother or with one's granddaughter. I mean, it's not just, rambling around in the world. That engagement can be with most anybody, and I think that's the kind of thing that that the image and the craft and intent can lead to. I think I would say that the students I teach who were born digital, this is a library term, that librarians talk about work that was born digital, versus your scans of your negatives. But there are people that were born digital, and there are people that were born analog. And those born digital want to do analog. And many of the people born analog feel like they need to somehow get digital. Or, where I direct a program experimental and documentary arts, people of, say, Van's generation often think analog is the experimental frontier, and people over 40 or 50 think new media is the experimental frontier. It's a really interesting, and that's not, literal. It doesn't all hold up that way, but there is a way that's happening, and again, it's this interest in other language and other kinds of translation, other ways of engagement, and other ways of making. I said that I didn't notice whose work this was when I was going through. This is Nancy Marshall, who I've known forever. I was so glad I didn't know it was hers. But nothing could be more simple than, some bones in a hand. I mean, there's nothing, you don't have to, if photographers are one plane ticket away from going to a great place to photograph, this is the photograph in the backyard, right? You don't have to go anywhere if you live on the edge of South Carolina coast. And I think that's where the sweetest, most lasting work can come from. It's from right out the back door in the metaphoric sense. It may take you, from the back door to somewhere else. The content may, but it's right around the corner. And I think photography has always been both blessed and a little bit cursed by this idea that we're supposed to go somewhere, supposed to get somewhere. We're supposed to go halfway across. I mean, photography had barely been invented when people were trying to get to Egypt with their and take daguerreotypes in Egypt, and to prove that they had been to Egypt. And that's not to say we shouldn't try to go to Egypt or wherever and go see the Big Rock or whatever it is we should go see. But there's something right around the corner, and I think that's where photography is most extraordinary. These are found images here. These are not even, I shouldn't say not even, these are images from the archive, and we're seeing an increasing amount of work, which is, I've heard several references here to re-looking at our own work, going back and looking at our own contact sheets. That's an archival process, looking to see what we overlooked, but also looking into the archive for other work that then is fuel for imagery in new work. I think that's one of the, we're at this wonderful moment of analog and digital, of the ability to make archives more accessible by scanning, and to make to be able to continue to work in cyanotype or platinum palladium or whatever kinds of 19th century processes. And so the blending of those two things is so rich. Now again, it poses so many opportunities, options, and I think in the end, like I was saying about bodies of work, I think for me at least, keeping the choices sort of simple. I've never been I don't want, I think Tom Bennett and I don't want more than one camera. I've got my 8x10 camera and I've got this camera, and I know what camera I'm going to use. I don't want to be in that, this is just me, I don't want to be in that space where I'm trying to figure out, how am I going to picture this? There's enough variables out in the world for me to keep the variables in the medium fairly contained. That's just me, and it may be because ultimately what I'm interested in at the end of the day is this is impossible to delineate between these two things, but I'm interested in the world in the picture as much as I am the picture itself. I'm interested in the life of the people I'm photographing as much as I am this representation that I'm going to get from this interaction. And yet, having said that, I want my representations to look as good as the representations on the wall in this show. I want things to sing in ways that are above and beyond that moment. This is a picture where sort of a ghost image from a photograph, pressed up against another photograph and not stored properly for a long period of time. So it's residue, it's photographic residue, and I want my photographic residue to be, to have a kind of poetry above and beyond the moment it was made, and yet, at the same time, I'm trying to make sure that it has a reciprocal relationship to the moment I made it, and I think that's the unique chemistry of the medium, and it's where it's where we all ought to be focused and figuring out again how to assemble bodies of work that last. I'm a big believer, and maybe it's because I'm so interested in history and culture, but I'm a big believer in the photograph lasting, and in us thinking about what it means for us for the photograph to last. It may mean that it lasts in a book. It may mean it lasts in an archive. It may mean we decide these don't last, and so therefore there's a barrel out in the yard that we burn them in. I don't know, but figuring out the place of the photograph in the moment, and in a show like this, and then what's the place of that work on down. We don't need anymore to teach somebody what a photograph looks like when you take one. I mean, I do this exercise in my class. No matter what photo class I'm teaching, I ask who is a photographer in the class, and so only it depends on, and sometimes in mixed classes of MFA and undergrad. So whoever, 2 or 3 out of 15 raise their hand and say they're photographers, and then I ask everybody if they've got their iPhone or their cell phone with them, and if they'll send me real quickly, go into their phone archive and send me a picture they want to look at, and we project them immediately. And I announce that everybody's already a photographer. You didn't come to my class to be a photographer. If a photographer is somebody who takes pictures, you're a photographer. Now we can get on to some more interesting stuff. So in some ways, it's liberated us from, having to start there. We can sort of start by saying, we can take pictures of anything we want. We can be the most unethical or the most ethical. We can be the most abstract or whatever. And you've probably already done all of those things. So let's get on with something else. So I find that kind of helpful in a way. Now the challenge of it is to get people to understand that, to get people to slow down, which I think is why the view camera class is such a, you wouldn't believe how excited, they're sort of overwhelmed at having to carry around this Calumet 4x5, which is a monorail and not at all portable, and a tripod, and they've got to learn to use a light meter, and they got to learn to load film, and they got to learn to process it in trays and all this stuff. They're overwhelmed by it, but in the end, it's all they want to do. And so, and none of the number of those people that are going to become photographers in the sense like in this room, it doesn't really concern me. I mean, I'm not feeling like I need to make photographers as much as make people slow down and see. The other challenge is that a lot of people are very reluctant, for good reasons, for notable reasons, and for legitimate reasons. They're somewhat reluctant to take the risks of just going out in the world and making pictures of other things other than their own, other people, other places. And I said this in COVID, I've spent a lifetime trying to get people to get closer. And in COVID, everybody was telling me we got to get people farther apart from each other. And I'm always trying to I've always pushed students to get beyond a kind of comfort zone and investigate what it means to go out into the world. And the camera is a way to do that. And for all the, the complexity of it and issues associated with it, I think that the last thing we need is us just looking at ourselves and not looking at other worlds. And I don't think it matters in the end what camera we use or what digital or analog. I mean, I think it matters in how it looks, it matters how it feels, it matters how you engage with it, but ultimately, the stuff either, the stuff on the other end either works or it doesn't, the imagery. But I don't think I could have gotten excited about photography if photography was running this mouse around over here all the time. My gravestone says, born analog, died digital. Thank you all. This is great.